I guess I thought I'd start off with the issue of war today because we are making war right now, and I've thought about the usual immediate. Yes, we support our commander-in-chief and so on. 65%. Of course, I always look at it differently. I say, yes, but 35% don't go along. And since the propaganda machine takes hold of the airwaves, of 98% of the airwaves, to have 35% oppose is a victory and a sign that some people, are thinking. I had a student once who wrote about war, and she said, wars are like wines. There are good years and bad years. See? She said, but war, she said, is not like wine. She said, war is like cyanide. One drop and you're dead. So even the good wars need to be re-examined and seen as not simply how they're presented to us in such a way as to make war acceptable as a way of solving problems. And so I'll take this, one of the best of our wars, which is the Revolutionary War. And if you tell the story of the revolution not from the standpoint of the founding fathers and not from the standpoint of, the need for... And remember, wars, yes, they're complex phenomena, and there are moral issues intertwined with them. And the Americans were oppressed by the English, but there were also Americans who were oppressed by Americans. The Revolutionary War was not that simple. And if you... for instance... Indians did not rush in exultation to celebrate the victory of the colonists over England, because for them it meant that the line that the British had set against westward expansion, the Proclamation of 1763, that line would now be obliterated, and now the colonists would be free to move west into Indian territory. They were not celebrating the American Revolution. Black slaves were not celebrating the American Revolution. And, it was estimated that maybe 1/3 of the American colonists supported the American Revolution. And 1/3 were opposed. And 1/3 were neutral. This was John Adams, one of the founding fathers and one of the revolutionary leaders. This was his estimate. And so I thought it would be interesting to tell the story of the American Revolution from the standpoint of just an ordinary working man who... listens to the Declaration of Independence read to him from the balcony in Boston, promising freedom and equality and so on, and immediately told that rich people can get out of service by paying several $100s. Wars are not simply wars of one people or against another, but wars always involve class differences within each side. In which the victory in war is very often a victory that's not shared by everybody, but only shared by a few. And that the people who fight the wars are not the people who benefit from the wars. The Spanish-American War gets a certain amount of attention because there's a heroism of Theodore Roosevelt and the Rough Riders and all of that. And I remember learning about that in school, but they never said anything about the war in the Philippines. There was something about how, as a result of the Spanish-American War, we took over the Philippines. But I never knew the details on that. But when you look into it, the Spanish-American War lasted 3 months. The Philippine War lasted for years and years. And it was a brutal, bloody suppression of the Filipino movement for independence, a war that in many ways was a precursor of the Vietnam War and the atrocities committed by the American army in the Philippine Islands. Now that's a story, that story of the war in the Philippines that has never been told. It would not accrue to military heroism or to the glory of the United States to tell that story. To tell the story, and there were black American soldiers in the Philippines who soon began to identify more with the Filipinos than with their fellow white Americans. and who were very conscious of the fact that while they were fighting to suppress the Filipinos, these black soldiers were hearing from back home that lynchings and race riots were taking place back home in their hometowns, and black people were being killed in large numbers. And here they were fighting against colored people, against non-white people for the United States government. And a number of black soldiers moved over and deserted and went over to fight with the Filipinos. And there was one incident when the Philippine War was supposed to be over, but really the American army was still suppressing pockets of rebellion here and there. And in 1906, this is 6, 7 years after the army has moved into the Philippines, in 1906, there was a massacre. That's the only way to describe it, of the Moros, the Muslim inhabitants of a southern island in the Philippines, a village of 600 men, women, and children who have no arms. And the American army swoops down on them and annihilates every last one of them. Mark Twain wrote angrily about this, wrote angrily especially about the fact that the President Theodore Roosevelt sent a letter of congratulations to the military commander who did this, saying this was a great military victory. This happens again and again, that when the military do heinous things, they're congratulated for great military victories. And I remember, have I ever seen a movie in which Theodore Roosevelt was presented as a racist, as an imperialist, as a supporter of massacres? And there he is up on Mount Rushmore. About World War II. Again, a good war, right? The best of wars. But not that simple. And that's why Studs Terkel, when he did his oral history called A Good War, he put quotation marks around good war, if you notice. Because there's a war, yes, humanitarian sympathies and fighting against a terrible evil, fascism, and on the other hand, a war marked by our own atrocities that multiplied as the war went on, culminating in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And I have not seen a film that dealt with our bombing of Hiroshima. The closest that we come to a film which deals with our bombing of civilian population is Kurt Vonnegut's book, the film that was made about Slaughterhouse 5. But that was an oddity, a rarity. The story of Indian removal of the Cherokees in the southeast, of the Trail of Tears. Andrew Jackson, one of our national heroes. I remember learning in school what a Democrat, large D, small d, middle D, Andrew Jackson was, you see. And I didn't learn then that he was a racist, that an Indian killer, that he signed the order to expel the Indians from the southeast part of the United States to across the Mississippi, to take them out of their lands. That was ethnic cleansing on a very large scale. I mean, the whole expulsion, the march of the American armies across the continent, and the driving of the Indians from their lands, and then finally into a little space in Oklahoma, which is called Indian Territory. And then invading Indian Territory, which is supposed to be their refuge when oil was discovered there. It was no longer to be called Indian Territory. And then, of course, the stories of black people in the United States finally told from the black people's point of view. And we've had a number of films about the civil rights movement in which you tell the story of the Montgomery bus boycott from Sissy Spacek's point of view. Or you tell the story of the murder of the 3 civil rights workers in Mississippi in 1964 from the standpoint of the FBI, who are the heroes of this film. When every person who was in Mississippi in 1964, and my wife and I were both there at the time, everybody knew that the FBI was the enemy. The FBI was watching people being beaten and not doing anything about it. The FBI was silent and not present when people needed protection against murder. And then they become in this Hollywood film, the heroes of the film. So, yeah, we need the story of the civil rights movement told from the standpoint of black people, and the story of Mississippi told from the standpoint of Fannie Lou Hamer.